Welcome back, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to win chess games the easy way, and more specifically how to take small positional advantages and turn them into wins. Because one of the most frustrating things as a chess player is when you work hard to get some sort of an advantage, but you just cannot see the way through to victory. That's what we're going to cover today. And specifically, we're going to cover one method, which is one of the most common. There's several very good ones, but this is the most common and it's my personal favorite, and that is infiltrating with the rooks onto the 7th rank or 2nd rank, depending on which side you're looking at it from. So this is one of the most common ways to turn advantages into wins, and I'm going to explain to you how and why. We're going to go over several examples like we always do to essentially show you different ways of this happening so that you can go away and start applying this to your games immediately. So let's get right into it with the first example. Here we are playing with black, and one thing you'll notice in chess games is there's a natural rhythm about things. So once you come out of the opening, you're in that early middle game stage. The very first thing that typically happens in chess games, outside of, tactical messes that can sometimes happen, in a normal balanced chess game, both sides try to improve the position of their minor pieces, and that's where the play really happens, with the minor pieces and pawn movements for space. And the rooks are left sort of chilling on the back rank, just waiting to see how the action's going to unfold. But what ends up happening is you get to a point where you've sort of placed your minor pieces on their best squares, the pawn structure stabilizes, and your queen is sort of chilling wherever it is. And the way to move forward is actually by doubling rooks and finding a way into the opponent's position. And this is, I'll show you how powerful it is, but this is something that happens over and over and over again. You can replay Grandmaster games and you can see this concept happen over and over again. Again, you'd probably have to start at maybe move 20 or so, and you start seeing this pattern happen. So it's just so powerful. Let's show it in this example. So here we want to get to c2. If we played rook to c6 instantly, white might play bishop b1. That's what we want to avoid, because this gives white attacking chances and takes that c2 square away from our rooks. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to trade that bishop so we get a clear path. And we're going to play rook to c6. So we're going to start doubling our rooks, right? Because our knight is sitting nicely on a5. We don't want to move that. And this bishop is defending our king side, specifically from a piece jumping into g5, and also applying pressure on this weakness on a3. So white wants to get this dark squared bishop into the game, so something like queen to e2 could be played. We're going to continue doubling, so now we're threatening to win a piece. Bishop to g5, and this is just a sample line, so we take, and now we're not going to take this d4 pawn. It looks like a free pawn, but we can run into a lot of trouble with queen to h5, which attacks 2 pawns in our king side, so we're just going to avoid that. We've got better ways to play the position. h6, giving our king some space on the back rank, or off the back rank. Knight f3, and here we're not going to play rook to c2 because that's going to lose a rook, but we're going to infiltrate onto c3 first. And you can kind of see here, we're applying pressure to this weakness. That's one of the beauties of infiltrating with your rooks. d4 is always going to be a weakness for white, and how can white continue really? Because if you think about it, white is pretty stuck. We're going to get a knight to b3. We are going to start getting a rook to c1, and white probably needs to create some space for his king. So h4, knight to b3, threatening a deadly fork here on the rook and the queen. Queen drops back, and now we can still play knight to c1, attacking the rook. And if the rook jumps here, we simply play queen to b2. And now let's take a look at this position. Even though the bishops have been traded off, we have taken our advantage and furthered it by infiltrating with our rooks, and now our queen follows right behind it. So on top of a whole bunch of things, we're threatening to win this rook, we're threatening to win this pawn. In this particular position, we've actually won the exchange because this rook is stuck. Rook takes c1, queen takes a4, check here, rook to c1, and white can resign. We've just crashed through. We're going to play something like queen to a1. We can take this pawn's weak, this is weak. It's just game over. So that's one example of infiltrating with the rooks. Now, this is another very common type of setup. This happens when the C and D pawns get exchanged, and you can see again, it's a pretty balanced position, even material, even pawn structure. White has a slight advantage because that bishop is very active on g5, taking away that d8 square from black's rooks. And on top of that, we have, again, think about it, we have put our minor pieces, or in this case, single minor piece, on its best square. So outside of g5, maybe e3 is also a good square, putting pressure on b6. The next thing, and the only way to really fight for an advantage in this position, is to double rooks, which white has done, and now we're going to infiltrate. Rook to d7, the queen moves out of the way, the other rook comes in, and here black's best move is actually queen to c3. It's still a much worse position for black. But let's just play this example out where black takes the passive approach, which isn't much worse, but it is it doesn't help black in any way. So here, white can't immediately win this b6 pawn because it's going to hang a rook. We don't want to do that. So we're going to drop the bishop back to e3. And if black played something like b5, it's going to just give us that square. We're going to plonk a bishop down there. And we have just improved our position. So if we look back at how we started, this is the starting position. In 4 moves, we have improved the position of all our pieces. And it's just a matter of time before this queen jumps into d5. And from d5, we're going to start applying pressure on f7. We might even swing this rook over to b7 and put this one on d7 and really triple the pressure on f7. We're going to apply pressure on this a6 pawn. This rook's coming in here, and black's whole position is falling apart. And again, if we start it from here, and maybe imagine if that rook was on a1, it'll be a lot more balanced. But here, white recognized that the only way to further this position is to double rooks and infiltrate. That's the key thing here. And this kind of a position with the rook infiltrating on d7 happens all the time in chess, so keep this one in mind. Next position is an exchange Slav type position. So the c-pawns have been traded off. Again, these are very symmetrical type of positions, and it's very hard to get an advantage. So what white has done well in this game is they've placed the knight on e5, which is very active, and they've managed to double rooks on the c-file. So what's going to happen next is we're going to start attacking this queen side by playing rook to c7. This starts threatening moves like queen to b4, queen to a5, and the other plan for white is actually queen to b4 and then queen to a3, putting pressure on a6, after which this rook can jump into c6 and we can start winning these pawns. Essentially what white wants to do in this position is apply enough pressure on the queen side, win these 2 pawns, and then white's just going to have a clear path for these passed pawns on A and B, on the A and B files. So rook to c7, and again, we're just threatening this rook coming in, queen b4, queen a3. How is black going to defend against it? Let's try knight to e8, you might think. Let's try kick that rook out. We're just simply going to play rook to b7. We can even play rook to d7. Let's go rook b7. If knight to d6, we're going to win that knight because we can jump into d7, queen b8, knight c6, and once the queen moves, we can take that knight. So that rook on b7 cannot be moved. So where can we go instead? Let's try queen to d6. But that's going to allow our queen to jump into a5. our next move is rook to c6, and we're going to win those queenside pawns. So what can black really do? Maybe f6? Would that work? Not really, because we've got a few ways to win here. We can even go knight to c6 and then knight to e7. We can just take this bishop on g6, or we can play rook to d7. But essentially, knight to c6 is the main idea. Queen d6, check. King here, and again, we're just going to get that queen to a5. And if black tries something like rook to f7, we're going to play check and pick up that rook. So again, black is very tangled in this position. And think about the starting position versus this position. So we started with this position. The only thing breaking the symmetry really is these doubled rooks. And we finished with, where are we? We finished with this position, where white's next move is going to be rook to c6, and we're going to start taking these queenside pawns. So again, rook infiltration is the way to progress the games. One interesting point here actually though, if we look at the engine says this is about a plus 2.3 advantage in this position for white. Now, the important thing to note with rook infiltrations are your minor pieces need to be prioritized. So rook infiltration happens after your minor pieces are on their best squares. And usually they're going to be, otherwise how can you have an advantage in a chess position if your minor pieces are on bad squares? So in this case, the knight is on e5. If the knight was on g3 instead of a plus 2.3 advantage to white, it's actually only plus 0.9, because now we no longer have things like knight to c6 or knight to d7 or supporting the rook on d7. You can kind of see these rooks need minor piece support, and that's why you only really look to infiltrate with your rooks once your minor pieces have been optimized first. Again, that's where you sort of keep your rooks chilling on the back rank until your minor pieces are on their best squares. Okay, a couple more quick examples. In this position, this is an endgame example, and I mean, most chess players will know how powerful a rook on the 7th is in the endgame. Here, white is just completely tying black's king and rook down to the defense of the pawns, and white's got a pretty clear-cut plan. b4, king here, and we're just going to march this king over to a6 and take that a7 pawn followed by the b7 pawn. And black is pretty helpless. We can, even if, let's just play a few moves on the king side, we can lock that position up if we need to. Here, 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 and again, black can't really do much to prevent this king from coming in. Black might have drawing chances. It's still, it's a type of position where black, might be able to create some counterplay with something like g5. So maybe white might want to play f4 first, really stopping everything from happening. But nonetheless, king d3 is the best move, and black's got to be very careful not to lose this game. Last example, and this is a fun one because, no pawns have been traded off. White does have an open b file though, and so this is how quickly you can really gain an advantage by infiltrating with your rooks. Here, we can kind of see this knight is on a good square. We don't really want to move it anywhere. It's looking at two good squares here. We're going to go a4. Now, the idea behind a4 is if the knight takes, we infiltrate with our rook, and we're going to start gobbling up these pawns and then have a winning advantage. If black tries to defend by stopping a5 from happening with a5 themselves, we can either play rook to b5, or the better move is knight to d5. And now, since this a pawn isn't defending the knight, we're legitimately threatening to take, and then win a pawn with our rook. So not c6. We're going to take, rook e7, and rook takes b7. And again, white is just going to start picking off these weak pawns, especially that a5 pawn, and this pawn is going to roll down the board. Again, this is rook infiltration. This is a small little fun tactic, but you want to watch out for these in your games where you can displace a piece, essentially, get it out of the way so that your rook can infiltrate. So there you go, some very common examples. There's heaps of permutations of these, but once you study some Grandmaster games, some classic games, you're going to start seeing this pattern happen over and over. You're going to start seeing the minor pieces being optimized first, and then the way through is to infiltrate with your rooks. That's a very common approach, and it leads to material wins, which then you convert in the end game, so on and so forth. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Apply these principles to your games. There's going to be a couple of videos that pop up on your screen here that I'm going to link to this video. I think either of these two would be a good one to watch next. So click on one and I'll see you on the other side. Peace out.